Sarah Martinez had always been different from other girls in her small Texas town. While her classmates played with dolls, she was in the backyard learning to shoot tin cans off fence posts with her grandfather's old rifle. Her father, a retired Marine sergeant, taught her discipline and respect for firearms from the age of 8. By 12, she could field strip and reassemble a rifle blindfolded. By 16, she was winning state shooting competitions. The military recruiter who visited her high school wasn't surprised when Sarah walked up to his table during career day. What did surprise him was her detailed knowledge of weapons systems and her unwavering determination to serve in combat roles. This was 2001, and opportunities for women in combat were limited, but Sarah had already researched every possible path to get as close to the action as possible. "I want to be where the fighting is," she told the recruiter plainly. "I don't care if I have to start at the bottom or work twice as hard as everyone else." The recruiter, Gunnery Sergeant Phillips, had seen plenty of tough-talking teenagers over the years. Most of them washed out during the first week of basic training. But something about Sarah's steady gaze and calm confidence made him believe she might be different. He handed her the enlistment papers and watched as she signed without hesitation. Basic training at Paris Island was everything Sarah had expected and more. The drill instructors tried to break her down like they did everyone else, screaming in her face and pushing her to her physical and mental limits. But Sarah had been preparing for this her entire life. While other recruits collapsed from exhaustion or broke down crying, she kept going. Her shooting scores were the highest in her platoon, and soon the other recruits were coming to her for tips and encouragement. During her third week, drill instructor Ramirez pulled her aside after evening chow. "Martinez, you're solid. Real solid. But being good at shooting targets isn't the same as being ready for combat. You understand that, right?" Sarah nodded. "Yes, sir. But I'm willing to learn everything else I need to know." "That's what I wanted to hear," Ramirez said. "There's a program coming up. Military Occupational Specialty Training for Security Specialists. It's not officially combat, but these folks get deployed to some pretty rough places. They guard convoys, protect forward operating bases, and sometimes find themselves in the thick of things." "Interested?" Sarah's eyes lit up. This was exactly the kind of opportunity she had been hoping for. "Absolutely, sir." The advanced training was held at Camp Lejeune in North Carolina. Sarah found herself in a class of 30 Marines, and she was one of only 3 women. The course covered everything from advanced marksmanship to explosive ordnance recognition, convoy security procedures, and close-quarters combat. Sarah excelled in every area, but it was during the heavy weapons training that she truly found her calling. The .50 caliber machine gun was a beast of a weapon. Weighing over 80 pounds when fully loaded, it could punch through armored vehicles and had an effective range of nearly a mile. Most of the male Marines in her class struggled with the weapon's weight and recoil, but Sarah handled it like she had been born to use it. Her instructor, Staff Sergeant Chen, watched in amazement as she consistently placed shots within a 6-inch group at 800 yards. "Martinez, where did you learn to shoot like that?" Chen asked after one particularly impressive demonstration. "My grandfather taught me to respect the weapon, sir. Said if you're going to pull the trigger, you better make it count." Chen nodded approvingly. "Well, your grandfather taught you right. I'm recommending you for additional heavy weapons certification. This is going to open up some interesting deployment opportunities for you." Sarah graduated at the top of her class and received orders for her first deployment to Afghanistan. She was assigned to provide security for a forward operating base in Helmand Province, one of the most dangerous regions in the country. Her job would be to man the defensive positions around the base perimeter and provide covering fire for patrols entering and leaving the compound. The flight to Afghanistan took over 20 hours, with stops in Germany and Kuwait. Sarah spent most of the journey studying intelligence reports about the area where she would be stationed. The Taliban were active in the region, and attacks on coalition forces were frequent. Rocket attacks, improvised explosive devices, and small arms fire were daily concerns. When the transport plane finally touched down at the airbase, Sarah was struck by the harsh beauty of the Afghan landscape. Mountains stretched to the horizon in every direction, their peaks capped with snow even in the summer heat. But there was no time for sightseeing. She was immediately loaded onto a convoy bound for Forward Operating Base Hammer, her home for the next 7 months. The base was a collection of prefabricated buildings, concrete barriers and guard towers surrounded by razor wire in defensive positions. Sarah was assigned to Tower 3, which overlooked the main approach road to the base. Her position was equipped with a .50 caliber machine gun, night vision equipment, and communication gear that linked her to the base's command center. Her first few weeks were relatively quiet, with only the occasional suspicious vehicle or person requiring observation and reporting. But Sarah used the time wisely, familiarizing herself with every aspect of her weapon and position. She practiced field stripping and reassembling the machine gun until she could do it in complete darkness. She studied the terrain around the base until she knew every ridge, valley, and potential hiding spot within her weapon's range. It was during her 4th week that things began to heat up. Intelligence reports indicated increased Taliban activity in the area, and there had been several attacks on coalition convoys traveling the main highway that passed near their base. The base commander, Colonel Williams, increased the alert level and ordered additional security measures. Sarah was pulling the night shift when she first encountered Admiral Thomas Hartley. He had arrived that afternoon as part of a high-level inspection team from theater headquarters. Hartley was a career Navy officer who had spent most of his time behind a desk in recent years. He was used to being deferred to and having his orders followed without question. The first sign of trouble came around midnight when Sarah spotted movement on the ridgeline to the east. Through her night vision scope, she could see several figures moving along a trail that intelligence had identified as a known Taliban infiltration route. She immediately called it in to the command center and began tracking the movement with her weapon system. This was exactly the kind of situation she had trained for, and she felt her heart rate increase as she prepared for potential combat. What she didn't expect was for Admiral Hartley to climb up into her tower, demanding to know what was happening. Admiral Hartley climbed the narrow ladder to Tower 3 with the confidence of a man who had never been told no. At 54 years old, he had spent the last 15 years in comfortable Pentagon offices, making decisions that affected thousands of Marines and soldiers without ever having to look them in the eye. His combat experience was limited to a brief deployment to the Persian Gulf in the early 1990s, where he had spent most of his time coordinating supply shipments from the safety of a command ship. Sarah heard heavy footsteps on the metal grating behind her but didn't turn around. Her eyes remained fixed on the ridgeline through her scope, tracking the movement of what appeared to be 6 individuals making their way down toward the base perimeter. Her finger rested lightly on the trigger, ready to engage if they showed hostile intent. "Marine, I asked you a question." Hartley's voice carried the irritation of someone unused to being ignored. "Sir, I have eyes on 6 potential hostiles moving along infiltration route Delta 7, Sarah replied without moving her head from the scope. "I've reported to command and am maintaining observation." Hartley moved closer, trying to peer over her shoulder at the target area. "I don't see anything. Are you sure you're not just seeing shadows or animals?" Sarah's jaw tightened slightly, but her voice remained professional. "Sir, I'm certain. They're approximately 800 meters out and moving in tactical formation toward grid reference 417921. "Let me have a look," Hartley said, reaching for the weapon's optics. "Sir, I need to maintain my position. If these individuals are hostile, I may need to engage at any moment." Hartley's face darkened. Throughout his career, he had grown accustomed to junior personnel stepping aside whenever he wanted something. The idea that a young Marine would refuse his request struck him as insubordination. "Marine, that's an order. Step aside and let me assess the situation." Sarah finally turned to look at him. Even in the dim red light of the tower, Hartley could see the determination in her eyes. "Sir, with respect, my orders are to maintain observation and be ready to engage hostile targets. I cannot abandon my weapon position during a potential threat situation." What happened next would later become the subject of heated discussions in military circles. Hartley, his authority challenged in front of what he assumed was just another young soldier who needed to learn respect, decided to physically assert his command. He reached past Sarah and grabbed the rifle by its carrying handle, attempting to push her aside. "I said move, Marine. When an admiral gives you an order, you follow it." Sarah's response was immediate and instinctive. Years of martial arts training that her father had insisted upon, combined with countless hours of weapons retention drills, kicked in without conscious thought. Her left hand shot up and grabbed Hartley's wrist in a grip that immediately caused him to gasp in pain. At the same time, she pivoted her body, using his own momentum against him. The Admiral found himself spun around and pressed face first against the concrete wall of the guard tower. Sarah's grip on his wrist tightened, and she applied just enough pressure to make it clear that any sudden movement would result in significant pain. Her right hand never left her weapon. "Sir, I'm going to ask you to step back and allow me to do my job," Sarah said, her voice calm but carrying an unmistakable edge. "There are potentially hostile forces moving toward this base, and I need to maintain my weapon position." Hartley, shocked by the sudden reversal of the situation, tried to pull free. Sarah's grip tightened incrementally, and he realized with growing alarm that this young Marine possessed strength and training that he had not anticipated. "Release me immediately." "That's a direct order." "Sir, I'll release you as soon as you step back and allow me to maintain my defensive position. My primary responsibility is the security of this base and everyone on it." Before the situation could escalate further, the radio crackled to life. "Tower 3, this is command. What's your status on those contacts?" Sarah keyed her radio with her free hand while maintaining her grip on Hartley. "Command, Tower 3. Still observing 6 individuals now at approximately 600 meters and continuing to approach. Requesting permission to issue warning shots." "Copy, Tower 3. You are cleared to fire warning shots if they continue to advance past the 500-meter perimeter." Sarah looked at Hartley. "Sir, I need to do my job now. Are you going to let me?" Hartley's face was flushed with anger and embarrassment, but the reality of the tactical situation was beginning to penetrate his wounded pride. If there really were hostile forces approaching the base, his interference could put lives at risk. Reluctantly, he nodded. Sarah released his wrist and immediately returned to her weapon. Through the scope, she could see that the figures had continued their advance and were now clearly carrying weapons. "Command, Tower 3, contacts are now confirmed hostile. I can see rifle-shaped objects and what appears to be a mortar tube. They've crossed the 500-meter line. Roger. Tower 3, you are cleared to engage." Sarah's first shot was a warning, aimed to impact the ground approximately 50 meters in front of the advancing figures. The .50 caliber round struck the rocky soil with a tremendous crack that echoed across the valley. The effect was immediate. The 6 figures dropped prone and began taking cover behind a small ridge. "Warning shot fired. Hostiles have taken cover but have not retreated," Sarah reported. For a moment, everything was quiet. Then muzzle flashes began appearing from behind the ridge where the intruders had taken cover. The distinctive crack of AK-47 rounds passing overhead filled the air, followed by the deeper thump of what sounded like mortar rounds being fired. "Taking fire! Taking fire!" Sarah called into her radio as she adjusted her aim toward the muzzle flashes. Admiral Hartley, who had been standing behind Sarah during this exchange, suddenly dropped to the floor of the tower as bullets began striking the concrete walls around them. The reality of combat was far different from the sanitized briefings he was used to receiving in Washington. The smell of cordite, the ear-splitting noise of incoming and outgoing fire, and the very real possibility of death were completely foreign to his experience. Sarah, however, seemed to transform. All traces of the respectful young Marine disappeared, replaced by a focused warrior who had trained her entire life for this moment. Her breathing slowed, her movements became precise and economical, and her world narrowed to the view, through her scope and the targets that needed to be eliminated, the first hostile to show himself. Above the ridgeline lived for exactly 2 seconds, after Sarah acquired her sight picture. The .50 caliber round struck him center mass, and he disappeared from view in a spray of dust and debris. Sarah smoothly traversed her weapon to the next muzzle flash and fired again. "Command, Tower 3, engaged hostiles. Confirmed 1 down, continuing to engage." The firefight lasted less than 10 minutes, but to Admiral Hartley, crouched on the floor of the guard tower with his hands over his ears, it felt like hours. Sarah fired methodically, each shot carefully aimed and devastatingly effective. When the shooting finally stopped, 6 hostile fighters lay dead on the ridgeline, their planned attack on the base thoroughly neutralized. The silence that followed the firefight was almost deafening. Sarah kept her weapon trained on the ridgeline, scanning for any signs of additional movement while her ears rang from the gunfire. The acrid smell of gunpowder hung heavy in the night air, and brass casings littered the floor of the guard tower around her feet. Admiral Hartley slowly raised his head from where he had been pressed against the concrete floor. His uniform was dirty, his face was pale, and his hands trembled slightly as he tried to regain his composure. In all his years of military service, he had never experienced actual combat. The closest he had come to danger was a missile alert during his deployment to the Gulf, and even then he had been safely aboard a ship miles from any actual fighting. "Command, Tower 3. Sarah spoke into her radio, her voice steady and professional. "Area secure. I count 6 confirmed hostile kills. No movement observed. Requesting patrol to confirm status of targets. Roger, Tower 3, patrol is en route. Outstanding work. Maintain overwatch until further notice." Sarah finally allowed herself to relax slightly, though she kept her eyes on the scope. She had trained for situations like this countless times, but there was a significant difference between shooting at paper targets and taking human lives. The weight of what she had just done was beginning to settle in, but she pushed those thoughts aside. There would be time for reflection later. Admiral Hartley struggled to his feet, brushing dust and debris from his uniform. His face was a mixture of embarrassment, anger, and something that might have been respect. The young Marine who had manhandled him just minutes earlier had then proceeded to eliminate 6 enemy fighters with surgical precision while he cowered on the floor. "Marine," he began, his voice hoarse. "Yes, sir?" Sarah replied, still focused on her scope. Hartley paused. His instinct was to reassert his authority, to punish Sarah for her earlier physical resistance to his commands. But he was not a fool, and the events of the past 15 minutes had forced him to confront some uncomfortable realities about his own limitations and assumptions. "That was impressive shooting," he said finally. "Thank you, sir. Just doing my job." The patrol team arrived 20 minutes later, confirming what Sarah already knew. 6 Taliban fighters lay dead on the ridgeline, along with 2 mortar tubes and a variety of small arms. Intelligence would later determine that the group had been planning to launch mortars at the base's fuel depot, an attack that could have killed dozens of American and Allied personnel. Colonel Williams, the base commander, arrived at Tower 3 shortly after the patrol's confirmation. He was a combat veteran with 3 deployments under his belt, and he had heard about the confrontation between his Marine and the visiting Admiral through the base's communication network. "Martinez," he said as he climbed into the tower. "A hell of a night's work." "Thank you, sir." Williams looked at Admiral Hartley, who was standing awkwardly to one side. "Admiral, I understand there was some confusion about command authority during the engagement." Hartley's jaw tightened. The base commander's tone was respectful, but carried an underlying message. Word of his interference with Sarah's defensive position had obviously spread quickly through the base's communication channels. "Colonel, I was simply trying to assess the tactical situation," Hartley replied stiffly. "Of course, sir. However, I think it's important to note that Marine Martinez was following established protocols for guard duty personnel. When posted to a defensive position, our people are trained not to abandon their weapons or allow interference with their ability to engage hostile targets. It's a matter of base security." Sarah remained focused on her scope, but she could hear the tension in the exchange behind her. Colonel Williams was walking a careful line, defending his Marine while still showing appropriate respect for Hartley's rank. "I'm sure you understand, Admiral, that in a combat environment, the person actually operating the weapon system needs to maintain control of that system. Martinez has extensive training on this particular weapon, and as tonight demonstrated, that training has proven invaluable." Hartley nodded reluctantly. The implication was clear. His interference had potentially jeopardized the base's security, and everyone present knew it. Over the next several hours, as the base returned to normal operations, word of the night's event spread throughout the compound. The story that emerged was one of a young Marine who had stood her ground against a senior officer, and then proceeded to eliminate an entire enemy assault team with textbook precision. The reaction among the enlisted personnel was overwhelmingly positive. Sarah had done exactly what they all hoped they would do in a similar situation. She had prioritized the mission and the safety of her fellow Marines over deference to rank. In the close-knit world of a forward operating base, where everyone's life depended on everyone else doing their job correctly, this kind of dedication was both noticed and appreciated. The officers' reaction was more complicated. Some, particularly the combat veterans, privately applauded Sarah's actions. They understood that in a firefight, expertise and training mattered more than rank, and Sarah had demonstrated both in abundance. Others, however, were concerned about the precedent of enlisted personnel physically resisting orders from senior officers. Regardless of the circumstances, Admiral Hartley spent the remainder of his visit in an increasingly uncomfortable position. His attempted intervention in the guard tower had become common knowledge throughout the base, and while no one was directly disrespectful, he could sense a change in how people looked at him. The easy deference he was accustomed to receiving had been replaced by polite professionalism. That carried an undertone of skepticism. Colonel Williams made sure to include Sarah in the briefings about the enemy attack, both to recognize her contribution and to subtly emphasize her expertise to the visiting admiral. During these sessions, Sarah demonstrated a thorough understanding of tactics, weapon systems, and enemy capabilities that impressed even the most experienced officers present. "Martinez," Williams said during one such briefing, "what's your assessment of the enemy's likely response to last night's failed attack?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "Sir, based on previous patterns in this area, I expect they'll shift their approach. They now know our defensive positions are effectively manned, and that we have good observation of their traditional infiltration routes. They'll probably try a different angle of attack, possibly from the western approach where the terrain provides more cover." "And your recommendation?" "I'd suggest increasing patrols in that area, and possibly repositioning one of our heavy weapons to provide better coverage of the western approaches. Also, sir, they left behind some communications equipment that might provide intelligence about their organization and future plans." Williams nodded approvingly. "Excellent analysis. I'll make sure our intelligence people examine that equipment thoroughly." Admiral Hartley watched these exchanges with growing recognition that he had seriously underestimated the young Marine. Sarah's knowledge and tactical thinking were clearly the result of intensive training and natural aptitude, not luck or accident. The deadly precision she had displayed during the firefight was backed by genuine expertise. On his final day at the base, Hartley found himself back at Tower 3. Sarah was on duty again, maintaining her vigilant watch over the approaches to the base. This time, however, he approached with considerably more respect. Admiral Hartley climbed the ladder to Tower 3 for the second time, but his approach was completely different from 3 nights earlier. This time he made noise as he climbed, ensuring Sarah knew he was coming. When he reached the top, he waited for her acknowledgement before speaking. "Permission to enter your position, Marine?" he asked formally. Sarah glanced back briefly. "Of course, sir." "Please watch your step. I've got good visibility on the western approaches today." Hartley moved carefully, making sure not to interfere with Sarah's sight lines or weapon positioning. He had spent the past 3 days thinking about what had happened during the firefight, and his perspective had undergone a significant shift. "Martinez, I owe you an apology," he said after a moment. Sarah kept her eyes on her scope but listened attentively. "Sir, I was wrong the other night. I had no business interfering with your defensive position, especially during a potential threat situation. My actions could have compromised the security of this base and put lives at risk." Sarah was quiet for a moment before responding. "Admiral, you were trying to assess the situation." "I understand that." "No," Hartley said firmly. "I was trying to assert authority in an area where I had no expertise. There's a difference, and it's an important one. You did exactly what you were trained to do, both in maintaining your position and in how you handled the situation with me." The admission was difficult for Hartley, but it was also liberating. Throughout his career, he had allowed his ego and rank to override good judgment in various situations. The events in Tower 3 had forced him to confront this pattern in a way that was impossible to ignore or rationalize away. "Can I ask you something, Martinez?" he continued. "Yes, sir. How did you know?" "I mean, how were you so certain those were hostile forces when I couldn't see anything?" Sarah adjusted her scope slightly before answering. "Experience, sir. I've been doing this for 8 months now, and you learn to recognize patterns. The way they moved, the formation they were using, the route they chose. It all indicated a planned approach rather than random movement. Plus, civilian traffic in this area stops completely after dark because of the security situation. Anyone moving around out there at night is either coalition forces, which we would have been notified about, or hostiles." Hartley nodded. "And the shooting? That level of accuracy under pressure doesn't happen by accident." "No, sir. I've been training with rifles since I was 8 years old. My grandfather was a Marine sniper in Korea, and my father served 3 tours in Vietnam. They both taught me that if you're going to carry a weapon, you have an absolute responsibility to know how to use it properly. Every shot I take has to count, because someone's life might depend on it. Your family has quite a military tradition. Yes, sir. But they also taught me something else that's just as important. They taught me that rank and respect are two different things. You can demand compliance because of your rank, but real respect has to be earned through competence and character. Hartley was quiet for several minutes, processing this statement. It was a lesson he wished he had learned decades earlier in his career. Too often, he had confused the automatic deference that came with his rank for genuine respect, and the distinction had significant implications for leadership effectiveness. Your family sounds very wise, he said eventually. They are, sir. They also taught me that sometimes doing the right thing means accepting consequences, even when those consequences might be unfair. Hartley understood what she meant. By physically restraining him in the tower, Sarah had potentially subjected herself to serious disciplinary action. Assault on a superior officer was a court-martial offense that could result in imprisonment and dishonorable discharge. She had chosen to prioritize the mission and the safety of the base over her own career security. Martinez, I want you to know that I won't be filing any reports about our disagreement the other night. As far as I'm concerned, you performed your duties exactly as you should have. Thank you, sir. I appreciate that. I also want you to know that I'm recommending you for a commendation for your actions during the firefight. 6 confirmed enemy kills while preventing a potentially catastrophic attack on this base. That's exactly the kind of performance that deserves recognition. Sarah finally turned to look at him directly. Sir, I was just doing my job. The real heroes are the people who go outside the wire every day. The medics who risk their lives to save wounded Marines. The engineers who clear IEDs from the roads. I just happened to be in the right place at the right time. This humility impressed Hartley even more than her marksmanship had. In his experience, most people who achieved notable success were eager to claim credit and seek recognition. Sarah's focus remained entirely on the mission and her fellow Marines. That may be how you see it, Martinez, but leadership has a responsibility to recognize and reward exceptional performance. What you did 3 nights ago prevented casualties and showed exactly the kind of initiative and skill we need in our Marines. Over the next hour, Hartley asked Sarah about her training, her career goals, and her thoughts on various aspects of military service. Her responses revealed a depth of thinking about leadership, tactics, and military culture that surprised him. This was not just a skilled shooter but a thoughtful professional with genuine potential for advancement. Have you given any thought to attending college or pursuing a commission as an officer? Hartley asked. Some, sir, but honestly I like what I'm doing right now. I like being directly involved in the mission rather than managing from behind a desk. There are plenty of officer positions that involve direct mission participation. Infantry platoon leaders, for example, or special operations officers. Sarah considered this. Maybe someday, sir. But for now, I want to get really good at what I'm doing, master the fundamentals before trying to move on to something else. This response revealed another aspect of Sarah's character that impressed Hartley. Rather than being eager to advance as quickly as possible, she was focused on genuine mastery of her current role. This kind of professional patience was rare and valuable. As the conversation continued, Hartley found himself thinking about his own career trajectory. He had been focused on advancement and rank accumulation from early in his service, sometimes at the expense of developing real expertise in his assigned roles. Sarah's approach, focusing on excellence in her current position rather than positioning for the next promotion, represented a fundamentally different philosophy. Martinez, can I give you some advice? Of course, sir. Don't let anyone convince you that your current role isn't important enough. What you're doing here, the expertise you're developing, the lives you're protecting, that matters more than any desk job in Washington. If and when you decide to pursue advancement, make sure it's because you want to take on greater responsibilities, not because someone tells you that's what success looks like. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. Thank you, sir. That's good advice. As Hartley prepared to leave Tower 3, he realized that this conversation had been more valuable than most of the official briefings he had attended during his visit. Sarah had given him insights into military culture, leadership, and professional development that were grounded in real experience rather than theoretical knowledge. One more thing, Martinez. If you ever decide you want to pursue additional training or education, I'd be happy to provide a recommendation. Your combination of technical skill, tactical knowledge, and professional judgment is exactly what our military needs in its leaders. Thank you, sir. I appreciate that offer. Hartley climbed down from Tower 3 with a fundamentally different perspective than he had carried up. The young Marine he had initially seen as insubordinate had revealed herself to be exactly the kind of professional the military needed to develop and promote. More importantly, she had taught him valuable lessons about leadership, competence, and the difference between rank and respect that would influence how he approached his remaining years of service. 2 months after Admiral Hartley's visit, Sarah's deployment at Forward Operating Base Hammer took an unexpected turn. Intelligence reports indicated that a high-value Taliban commander was operating from a compound approximately 15 miles north of the base. This individual was responsible for coordinating attacks throughout the region, including the attempted assault that Sarah had thwarted from Tower 3. The mission to capture or eliminate this target required a different approach than the base defense operations Sarah had been conducting. A joint task force was assembled, combining Marines from the base with Army Special Operations personnel who had been tracking the Taliban commander for several weeks. Captain Rodriguez, the Marine officer commanding the operation, had heard about Sarah's performance during the base attack. When he learned that she was qualified on multiple weapon systems and had demonstrated exceptional marksmanship under combat conditions, he requested her inclusion in the mission. "Martinez, this isn't going to be like guard duty," Rodriguez explained during the mission briefing. "We're going into hostile territory where engagement is likely. Your job will be to provide overwatch and precision fire support for the assault team. Are you ready for that level of responsibility?" Sarah nodded without hesitation. "Yes, sir. Whatever you need me to do." The operation was scheduled for pre-dawn hours when the target compound would be least alert. Sarah would be positioned on a ridgeline approximately 800 meters from the objective, where she could observe the entire area and provide covering fire if needed. Her weapon for this mission was a specially configured M82 50 caliber sniper rifle with advanced optics and suppressor. The night before the operation, Sarah spent hours studying satellite photos and topographical maps of the target area. She memorized every building, wall, and potential firing position within her area of responsibility. She calculated wind patterns, elevation adjustments, and range cards for every possible engagement scenario she could imagine. Sergeant First Class Jackson, the Army Special Operations team leader, joined her during this preparation. Jackson was a veteran of multiple combat deployments and had worked with Marine snipers before, but Sarah's attention to detail impressed him. "You've done this kind of work before?" he asked, watching her mark potential target reference points on her map. "No, Sergeant. This is my first time in a direct action role, but my training emphasized that preparation prevents poor performance," Jackson smiled. "That's exactly right. The teams that get in trouble are the ones that wing it. You're going to do fine." The insertion went smoothly. Sarah's team moved through the darkness using night vision equipment, following a route that avoided known Taliban patrol areas. They reached the overwatch position 3 hours before dawn, giving Sarah time to establish her firing position and confirm her sight picture on the target compound. Through her scope, Sarah could see the compound clearly. It consisted of 3 main buildings surrounded by a high wall with a single entrance. Intelligence indicated that the Taliban commander was likely in the largest building, along with several bodyguards and other personnel. The exact number of hostile forces was unknown, but estimates ranged from 8 to 12 individuals. At 04:30 hours, the assault team moved into position around the compound. Sarah maintained constant observation, reporting any movement or changes in the target area. The pre-dawn darkness was giving way to the gray light of early morning when the operation began. The assault team's initial approach was silent, using specialized equipment to breach the compound wall without creating noise. Sarah watched through her scope as the team moved with practiced precision, each member knowing exactly where they needed to be and what they needed to do. The plan started to unravel when a guard dog began barking inside the compound. Within seconds, lights began coming on in all 3 buildings, and Sarah could see armed figures moving between them. The element of surprise had been lost. "Overwatch, this is Alpha Team," Rodriguez's voice crackled through Sarah's radio. "We're going loud. Stand by for support fire." "Copy, Alpha Team. I have visual on multiple hostiles. Ready to engage on your command." The firefight began immediately. Muzzle flashes erupted from windows and doorways throughout the compound as the Taliban fighters engaged the assault team. Sarah could hear the distinctive sounds of AK-47s and RPG explosions mixing with the Americans' M4 rifles and hand grenades. Through her scope, Sarah tracked individual targets as they moved between buildings. Her first shot eliminated a fighter who was attempting to set up a machine gun position that would have endangered the assault team. The .50 caliber round struck him center mass, and he disappeared from view. Overwatch, good hit. I need you to suppress the southeast building. We're taking heavy fire from there. Sarah shifted her aim to the building Rodriguez had indicated. She could see muzzle flashes from multiple windows, indicating at least 3 or 4 fighters inside. Her next series of shots were aimed at the windows themselves, using the massive power of the .50 caliber rounds to penetrate the mud brick walls and eliminate the threats inside. The effect was immediate and devastating. The heavy rounds punched through the building's walls like they were made of paper, and the return fire from that position ceased abruptly. Sarah had effectively neutralized an entire firing position with 4 precisely placed shots. Overwatch, outstanding work. Alpha team moving to the main building now. Sarah continued to scan the compound through her scope, looking for additional threats. Her training had taught her that in urban combat situations, enemies often appeared from unexpected directions, and maintaining situational awareness was critical to mission success. It was then that she spotted movement on the roof of the main building. A figure was climbing up what appeared to be an exterior stairway, carrying what looked like an RPG launcher. If he reached the roof, he would have a clear shot at the assault team members who were stacked outside the building's main entrance. Sarah's calculation was instantaneous. Range 750 meters. Wind minimal. Target movement. Steady climb up exterior stairs. Time to engagement. Approximately 15 seconds before he reached firing position. She adjusted her aim point slightly to account for the target's movement and squeezed the trigger. The shot was perfect. The Taliban fighter dropped the RPG launcher and tumbled backward off the stairs, eliminating what could have been a catastrophic threat to the assault team. Overwatch. I just took out an RPG gunner on the main building roof. Area should be clear for your breach. Roger, good eye. We're going in now. The breach of the main building was swift and violent. Sarah could hear the explosions as the assault team used breaching charges to enter through multiple doors simultaneously. The sound of gunfire from inside the building indicated that the Taliban fighters were putting up strong resistance. Through her scope, Sarah continued to watch for threats from the other buildings in the compound. Her vigilance paid off when she spotted 2 fighters attempting to flank the assault team by moving through a series of outbuildings along the compound's western wall. Her next 2 shots eliminated both flanking fighters before they could reach positions where they might threaten the Americans. Sarah was demonstrating exactly the kind of precision and tactical awareness that made the difference between successful missions and tragic failures. Alpha Team, this is Overwatch. I've eliminated 2 hostiles attempting to flank from the west side. Your rear is secure, no copy, Overwatch. We've got the primary target. Starting our exfil now. The extraction went more smoothly than the assault. With Sarah providing continuous overwatch, the team moved efficiently back through the compound and toward their extraction point. The entire operation had taken less than 40 minutes from breach to exfil, but in that time, Sarah had fired 17 shots and eliminated 8 enemy fighters. During the helicopter flight back to base, Sergeant Jackson sought out Sarah to discuss her performance. The hardened Special Operations veteran had worked with some of the military's most elite snipers, and he was genuinely impressed by what he had witnessed. Martinez, that was some of the finest precision shooting I've ever seen in a combat environment. You eliminated threats that none of us on the ground even knew existed. That RPG gunner on the roof could have wiped out half our team. Sarah was cleaning her rifle as they talked. Sergeant, I was just doing what I was trained to do. The assault team took all the real risks. Don't sell yourself short. What you did out there saved American lives, and that's what matters. Have you given any thought to specialized training? The Army has some excellent sniper schools that might interest you. I appreciate that, Sergeant. Right now I'm focused on learning everything I can in my current role, but I'll definitely consider it for the future. When they returned to base, word of the successful mission spread quickly. Sarah's role in the operation's success did not go unnoticed, particularly her ability to identify and eliminate threats that the ground team couldn't see. Colonel Williams called her into his office the day after the mission. Martinez, I've been getting some very positive feedback about your performance on yesterday's operation. Captain Rodriguez tells me your Overwatch work was exceptional, and Sergeant Jackson said you demonstrated skills that would be valuable in specialized units. Thank you, sir. I was glad I could contribute to the mission's success. Williams leaned back in his chair, studying the young Marine in front of him. Sarah, I'm going to be direct with you. You have talents that could take you much further in this organization than a standard enlisted career path. Have you given any serious thought to pursuing a commission? Sarah considered the question carefully before responding. Sir, I've thought about it, but honestly, I'm not sure I'm ready for that level of responsibility yet. I feel like I still have a lot to learn in my current role. That's exactly the kind of answer that suggests you might be ready for greater responsibility. The Marines who rush to seek promotion often aren't the ones who should get it. The ones who focus on mastering their current job and serving their fellow Marines effectively are usually the ones we most need to promote. Williams opened a folder on his desk and pulled out several documents. I'm recommending you for the Navy Achievement Medal for your actions during the compound assault. I'm also recommending you for advanced marksmanship instructor training and placement on the list for potential officer candidate school. Sarah was quiet for a moment, processing this information. The recognition was gratifying, but she was more interested in the training opportunities than the medals or potential promotion. Sir, I'd be very interested in the marksmanship instructor training. Teaching other Marines how to shoot effectively could have a real impact on mission success and survivability. I thought you might feel that way. The training is intensive, but based on your performance here, I don't think you'll have any problems with it. It would also position you well for future specialized assignments if you're interested. As Sarah left Colonel Williams' office, she reflected on how much her life had changed since that night in Tower 3, when she had confronted Admiral Hartley. What had started as a simple guard duty assignment had evolved into opportunities she had never imagined when she first enlisted. 3 years later, Staff Sergeant Sarah Martinez stood before a classroom of Marine recruits at the Corps' Advanced Marksmanship Training Center in Quantico, Virginia. Her transformation from the young private who had enlisted straight out of high school was remarkable. She now wore the stripes of a non-commissioned officer, had completed multiple combat deployments, and was recognized as one of the Marine Corps' premier marksmanship instructors. The students in her class represented the Marines' most promising shooters, selected from units across the globe to receive advanced training that they would take back to their own units. Sarah's reputation had preceded her. Stories of her combat performance in Afghanistan had become part of Marine Corps lore, though the details had grown somewhat in the telling. The first thing I want you to understand, Sarah began her instruction, is that marksmanship is not about being a hero or proving how tough you are. It's about taking responsibility for every round you fire and understanding that your skill with a weapon might be what keeps your fellow Marines alive in a critical situation. In the back of the classroom sat Admiral Thomas Hartley, now nearing retirement after a career that had taken an unexpected turn following his encounter with Sarah in Tower 3. That experience had fundamentally changed his approach to leadership and his understanding of what real military competence looked like. After returning from Afghanistan, Hartley had used his influence to champion training programs that emphasized practical skills over administrative credentials. He had become an advocate for promoting based on demonstrated ability, rather than just time in service or political connections. The changes he had helped implement were modest but significant, and they had already begun to improve the quality of leadership throughout the Navy. Hartley had requested permission to observe Sarah's instruction as part of his final official duties before retirement. He wanted to see how the young Marine who had taught him so much about leadership had developed in her own career. Sarah noticed the Admiral's presence but continued her instruction without acknowledgement. Her focus remained entirely on her students, just as it had been focused on her mission that night in Tower 3 years earlier. Sergeant Martinez, one of the students asked, "We've heard stories about some of your combat experiences. Can you tell us about what it's really like to engage enemy targets in a firefight?" Sarah paused, considering how to answer. She had learned to be careful about discussing combat experiences, knowing that sensationalized stories could give young Marines unrealistic expectations about what war was actually like. The most important thing to understand about combat shooting is that it's nothing like shooting at a range, she said finally. Everything happens faster. Your heart rate spikes, your hands might shake, and you have to make life and death decisions in seconds while people are shooting back at you. The only way to perform effectively under those conditions is to train so intensively that your responses become automatic. She moved to the whiteboard and began sketching a tactical scenario. Let me tell you about a situation where training made the difference between mission success and potential disaster. Over the next hour, Sarah walked her students through the compound assault mission, explaining how proper preparation, situational awareness, and disciplined shooting techniques had enabled her to provide effective support for the assault team. She emphasized decision-making processes rather than dramatic details, focusing on the practical lessons that could help her students in their own future deployments. Admiral Hartley listened with growing admiration. The young woman who had physically restrained him 3 years earlier had become a master instructor who understood not just the technical aspects of marksmanship, but also how to teach those skills to others. Her ability to translate combat experience into practical lessons demonstrated the kind of leadership development the military needed to foster. After the class ended, Hartley approached Sarah as her students filed out of the classroom. Staff Sergeant Martinez, that was an excellent presentation. Your students are lucky to have an instructor with your experience and teaching ability. Sarah came to attention and saluted. Thank you, Admiral. I appreciate you taking the time to observe my instruction. Actually, I was hoping we could talk for a few minutes if you have time. There's something I'd like to discuss with you. They walked to a quiet area outside the classroom building where they could speak privately. Hartley had aged visibly in the 3 years since their encounter in Afghanistan, but Sarah could see that he carried himself differently now, with less arrogance and more genuine confidence. Sarah, Hartley began, using her first name deliberately. I wanted to thank you for the lessons you taught me in Tower 3. That experience fundamentally changed how I approached the rest of my career. Sir, you don't need to thank me for anything. I was just doing my job. No, it was much more than that. You showed me the difference between real leadership and just throwing rank around. You demonstrated that competence and dedication matter more than position or title. Those are lessons I needed to learn, and they made me a better officer for the remainder of my service. Hartley pulled out a small jewelry box from his pocket. I wanted to give you something before I retire next month. This is my personal challenge coin from my first command. I've carried it for 25 years, and I want you to have it. Sarah opened the box to find an ornate coin bearing the insignia of a naval destroyer. She could see that it showed significant wear from years of handling, indicating its personal importance to Hartley. Sir, I can't accept this. This obviously means a lot to you. It does, which is exactly why I want you to have it. You represent everything that's best about our military. Skill, dedication, integrity, and the courage to do what's right even when it's difficult. I hope this coin will remind you that those qualities are recognized and valued. Sarah accepted the coin with genuine gratitude. Thank you, sir. I'll carry this with pride. There's one more thing I wanted to discuss with you. Hartley continued. I've been following your career, and I know you've been offered opportunities to attend officer candidate school. Have you made a decision about that? Sarah had indeed been wrestling with this decision for several months. Multiple senior officers had recommended her for commissioning, and she had finally agreed to submit an application. The selection board had accepted her, and she was scheduled to attend OCS in 6 months. Yes, sir. I've decided to accept the commission opportunity. I'll be attending officer candidate school this fall. Hartley smiled broadly. That's outstanding news. The Marine Corps needs officers who understand what real leadership looks like, and you've demonstrated that understanding consistently. I hope I can live up to that expectation, sir. Leading Marines is a huge responsibility, and I want to make sure I'm ready for it. You're ready, Hartley said with conviction. You've been leading by example since you were a private. Now you'll have the formal authority to match the natural leadership ability you've already demonstrated. They talked for another 20 minutes about leadership, military service, and Sarah's plans for her officer career. Hartley shared insights from his own experience and offered advice about navigating the challenges of increased responsibility. As they prepared to part ways, Hartley reflected on how much both of their lives had been changed by that confrontation in Tower 3. Sarah had taught him invaluable lessons about real leadership and military competence. In return, his recognition of her abilities had helped open doors for advancement that might otherwise have remained closed. Sarah, one final piece of advice. Never lose sight of what made you an effective Marine in the first place. Your focus on mission accomplishment and taking care of your people, those are the fundamentals that matter, regardless of your rank or position. Thank you, sir. I'll remember that. 6 months later, Second Lieutenant Sarah Martinez graduated from Officer Candidate School at the top of her class. Her instructors noted her exceptional leadership, potential, and recommended her for assignment to an infantry unit where she could put her combat experience and tactical knowledge to immediate use. Admiral Hartley, now retired, watched the graduation ceremony from the audience. Seeing Sarah receive her commission and gold bars was one of the most satisfying moments of his military career. The young Marine who had taught him about real leadership was now positioned to teach those same lessons to the next generation of military professionals. As Sarah took her oath of office as a Marine officer, she thought back to that night in Tower 3 when she had made the difficult decision to prioritize her mission over deference to rank. That choice had set in motion a series of events that had shaped her entire career and taught her that real leadership was about competence, integrity, and the courage to do what was right regardless of the personal cost. The lessons learned in that guard tower, about the difference between rank and respect, about the importance of expertise and preparation, and about the responsibility that comes with carrying a weapon in defense of others, would guide her throughout her officer career and beyond. Staff Sergeant Martinez had become Lieutenant Martinez, but the fundamental principles that made her an effective Marine remained unchanged.